I want to recognize one of the professors, Dr. Peter Scarry, who's from Boston College, who's a professor on political science. He's actually in the process of finishing a book on Muslims in the United States. I will not give the title, but it's going to be a very important book. He's been working on it for many months and years. And I have another psychiatrist who has already written a book on this topic as well, and that's Dr. Marvasti. He's here as well, and we are hoping that this will be a good, useful conference discussion that we'll have. So with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Saeed to come and share her perspective, and then I'll come back later to talk about some of the other things. Dr. Saeed.
Well, I said to Dr. Anwar before coming here, I said, who's going to be in the audience? Shall I start by asking some questions to get a sense of how much people know so I don't end up boring them or overwhelming them? And he said to me, they're all very sophisticated people. So he knows you, he has invited you to these kind of events before, so I'm going to believe that. So if you don't find me sophisticated enough, go ahead and ask the questions later on. Or if you find me boring, just nod off until I'm done. So we're going to start with what I'm assuming is the reason why we're meeting. We're meeting because we were all looking for answers after Boston. This has been, there have been a series of events that have happened, and every time this happened, it, not only traumatizes us for what happened then, but also brings back older trauma back to our minds, back to our hearts, where we end up feeling re-traumatized again. There's the way I can sum up what happened in Boston, I think, was not, this summary was not by me. I think it was done by New York Times. And I think this explains more than anything where things are right now, which is their theories, their commentators, but really, we really don't know much right now. And I think what you hear right now is a lot of speculation. As somebody has said, we have a lot of instant experts. And, experts are very easy to find in America. I think we should start exporting some of them. I think very valuable, but I think we have a little too many of them. But I think the important thing to recognize is we don't know everything. And I think that's going to be important as we go forward and talk about other things. We really have to acknowledge that before we move on and make assessments and judgments and so forth. Now I'm going to start by talking about an event that happened a few years ago, April of 1999. As I go through the description of it, some of you may recognize it. What I'm going to request is everybody if you recognize it, just keep that in mind. And I want every individual here to come to the answer themselves. This is about a man who was involved, a young man who was involved in an incident. I have quoted verbatim how he has been described. He smoked, he drank, dated, got invited to parties, got high, did his homework, and earned A's. He attended football games, dances, wrote a poem for creative writing about ending hate and loving the world. Now, many of us know kids like that. He knew when to play and when to get serious. 4 days before the massacre, he was promoted to be the shift manager at the pizza joint he used to work at. His friend, whose name I will mention in a few minutes, he was unreliable. If he had a run-in with authority, he would be hyperventilating, he'd get nervous. He tended to be the follower who would follow the person that I mentioned in the slide before this. He was described as pure emotion. In life, he was timid and shy, but everybody knew he had a bright future, and he was heading to college, of course. They were both considered brains in the high school terminology. Outwardly, they looked like normal young boys about to graduate. On Judgment Day, as they called it, on April 20th, 1999, they carried out the massacre using propane tanks fashioned as bombs, which did not go off, and guns. They aimed for maximum human density for a count of 2,000, But since their bombs malfunctioned, they could only massacre 13. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were playing to the media, which obliged, and this led to many copycat attacks. This was not labeled at that time as a terrorist act in the media. Many of you may remember the coverage for the Columbine shooting. The media propagated myths about the trench coat mafia, the campus losers, killing someone because she believed in God. None of that, of course, was true. But all of us, or I would say most of us, fell for that. And we fell for that for all these years until 2009, somebody actually went through the actual data, not how it was reported in the media, the actual testimony, the actual records that were received from law enforcement through lawsuits, and found out that everything that we as a nation believed in was false. And we believed it for quite a few years. We believed it for 10 years. So I think let's start with some definition. And now these things are hard to define, and I cannot claim that what I'm going to say today is the definitive definition of anything. But these are starting points, and we need to start. When we say the word extremism, that very much depends on the context we're talking about. So the people who marched on Pentagon in 1967, they were fairly removed from what would be considered the norm, the median of the society. They were called extremists. They were called, I believe, extremists and hippies and black radicals. There were certain names that were given to them. In the present day world, these people are, probably getting the early bird breakfast somewhere in Florida. But at that time, they were the extremists that everybody feared, because that was going to be 1967, that was going to be the end of America as people knew it. So I think that's important to remember, that this is subjective. Now, this is in no way to say that what we're going to talk about is a minor matter or is just a subjective matter. But I think it's important to remember there's not one clear definition, and definitions vary from people to people. Now, extremism is a state. It's a set of beliefs. And I'm going to, in the next slide, I'm going to talk about what I think is, in my opinion, the better definition for extremism. But radicalization is a process. So if you can imagine this, it's a dynamic thing. It's not something that people are there and that's where they are forever. It can be, maybe that's where they're going to be. Maybe they're going to move along. And it's basically, to me, it means the process of developing the extreme ideologies. My mentor at the Committee for Political Psychiatry and Terrorism, Dr. Gerald Post, described political terrorism as such. It is political warfare waged through the media. Now, the media is very important. Again, if we go back to what happened at Columbine, which, one could say that, Eric Harris had interest in everything German, everything Nazi, but really it wasn't really very much an ideology-based attack. It was an attack based on forces we don't fully understand, what goes on in the mind of 17 and 18-year-old people who go out and do what they do. But they played to the media. They left extensive notes that were meant to be discovered and played to the media. So the media, and through them, us as people, form a certain opinion of their act and an impact of the act as they would have liked it. I'm sure if there's a physician here, and I know there are a few, we live by the 2x2 table. If you try to make a 2x2 table of what we're talking about today, there are people who have extremist ideas but are nonviolent. For example, it just so happened this morning I was seeing somebody in my practice, and she participated in something that she truly regretted. It was very extreme, but it was nonviolent. And so she was she wouldn't probably fall into this category. This person that I'm talking about, she's a former radical from the 70s. And then there are people who have peripheral involvement with ideology, if any, and they're not really engaged in violent actions. People who are engaged in violent actions but have very peripheral involvement with the ideology, if any. And again, the Columbine example would fall here. But the group that we're most concerned about for the purpose of discussion today are people who are violent and extremists. And I think this is a very important thing to remember, because sometimes, and I think it depends on what you watch on TV, everything that is considered extreme is considered condemnable. And not everything needs to be condemned. Yes, maybe it wouldn't be something I would do, or many people here would do, but it may be pretty innocuous. On the other hand, when it gets into this bullseye, then we've got a problem. So this is what I think is a better definition of violent extremism. It describes the beliefs and actions of people who support or use violence to achieve ideological, religious, or political goal. Again, to keep in mind, radicalization is a process, a pathway. It's not a condition. So you're not radicalized as a state. You may be somewhere along that pathway. And the current knowledge is mostly conceptual. It is not based on empirical data. Now again, because I know there are a few physicians in this room, the kind of data that's used in violent extremism, and you hear experts talk about, if you try to present that at a medical conference, people will shoo you out of the conference. They'll be like, what kind of crappy data is that? But that's what everybody hears. Now, vulnerability to radicalization amongst Muslims in the US, that's of special interest to me, because in addition to the professional associations that Dr. Anwar has mentioned, I think my proudest achievement is being a mother of 3, and as a result of that, I have, I feel a duty to be participant in my community. And we have a community center, a Muslim community center, where I happen to be serving as a president as of now. And so this is an area that has become progressively more important to me. And these are the things that have been identified as the factors that cause vulnerability to radicalizations among Muslims in the US. Disengagement from the mosque. Now that seems all backward, right? But that's exactly true. That has been proven by data. It has been survey after survey. When they have interviewed people, the more radical you are, the less likely you are to be going to a mosque. The reason is, when you're that radical, the mosque is not radical enough. And a lot of people then either leave because they're unhappy with the mosque and feel like the leaders are avoiding the real issue, or more, I think, more in a causative fashion, because they don't have the knowledge of the religion, because they have not been part of the mosque. They are free to make these, out there extremist ideas of what the religion is supposed to state. Disconnect from the family is very important, and I don't want to go into each individual case, but time and again one sees that the child or the adult child or the late teenager who was not connected to the family is the one who ended up finding themselves in trouble. Meeting an undercover agent or informant, unfortunately, really predisposes you to become a radical, because there have been cases in the Muslim community where they have found somebody who was trying to misinform and entice kids into doing things that were really wrong and extreme and violent. And so they reported to the police, and only to find out that this person happened to be an informant. So unfortunately, while well-meaning as it is, the sting operations may be backfiring a little bit. And then being male, of course. And that's probably true for a lot of violent actions. And there's biology behind it, culture behind it, but that's not unusual for this. Loneliness is an important factor. And loneliness doesn't have to be necessarily that you are living out in Montana somewhere. The loneliness can be how connected you are to your surroundings.